I have this personal code that the service to humanity is the best work of life. And so my way of service was to be in community organizations that help other people. The community's good to me, so I should pay back the community through my talents and sometimes through money.
That was Phil Ponder. Best known for his watercolor renderings of Nashville skylines and historic buildings, Phil Ponder has a unique artistic style that has captured our hearts and our Nashville for the last 50 years or more. In addition to serving as a community visual historian and a well-respected artist, he's also been a trusted community leader and advocate, serving on Metro Council for 4 terms. As a dedicated family man, former Navy minesweeper, now fighting a personal battle against cancer, and a lover of peach milkshakes, let's learn more about how this man has redefined retirement and how he keeps calm and carries on.
I'm Sally Hussey, the CEO of 50 Forward, and we elected to launch this podcast because we know older adults have such inspiring stories and wisdom worth sharing. We have now all learned that social connections are critical to our well-being. This podcast is made possible by 50 Forward, the leading resource for adults 50 plus in Middle Tennessee who seek to live longer, more fulfilling lives.
You're listening to Squeeze the Day, where we talk to extraordinary people over the age of 50 who are living their best life now. Their stories of a well-lived life are both inspiring and encouraging to all of us as we seek to navigate a meaningful and purpose-driven second chapter in our life. I'm Susan Sizemore, Communications Director for 50 Forward, so let's get started. Today we're here with Phil Ponder. Phil, many people know you as an artist and a Metro Council representative, but you had another career. Tell us a bit about that and your retirement transition.
Well, it seems like I've been in about 6 different careers, very honestly, but I think the one you're referring to is the fact that I was actually on staff for Congressman Jim Cooper for a little over 10 years. That was a great experience, and I really appreciate the fact that after my 8 years of service in the Metro Council, the congressman felt like I could lend a little bit of expertise to his staff in the area of community contacts. So that's why I was placed on the staff.
And before you had that career, I believe, did you work also in more of a corporate setting?
Yes, my main purpose in life for the earlier part of my life was to find a business that I was comfortable in, and that happened to work out to be the shoe business. Actually, when I was in high school, I worked on a Saturday at a little shoe store in my hometown in Ocala, Florida. And we sold mostly products that were made by what was then General Shoe Corporation, which was later changed to Genesco. The fact, the same year I went to work for them. I had been in the Navy and spent 3.5 years on a minesweeper. And when I got out, I was asked to come to Nashville to be in the training program for Genesco. So I started there on June 1st, 1959, and I stayed 30 years. And I had a lot of different responsibilities, everything from customer service on up to actually being the president of 2 or 3 of the divisions. So that all ended in 89, and that's when I had the opportunity to take my hobby, which was artwork, and I had been doing very little because I was on a plane most every week going somewhere, didn't have time to work on the artwork except on Saturday. And then all of a sudden had plenty of time to do more than just one art piece a year like I had been for the previous 10 years. So in 89, quite a transition, a second full career as an artist, and didn't know exactly where I was going, but I just felt like it was the right thing to do, and had a lot of people that helped me along the way. I'm just very, very blessed that I'm still able to do that so many, 42 years later. So wow. There's been a lot of water over the dam since then. And a lot of watercolors over the dam.
When did you know you could first draw, and what did you draw in your early years?
Actually, I still have the first grade coloring book that I had when I was 6 years old. And I'd colored in a Christmas tree and a few people. It was just one of those standard things that they give you in kindergarten and first grade, where you try to stay within the lines. And I did pretty good. And I guess maybe that was encouragement from the actual work that I did in school. And then my mother certainly encouraged me a whole lot. Didn't do a whole lot with it until I was a junior in high school. And there were 6 of us that went over to a girl's house. She lived at Silver Springs. Her name was Susan Carmichael. She was a graduate of the Chicago Institute of Art and a very accomplished artist in her own right. So she taught us basics. I didn't do anything super, super good, but at least I knew how to work with oils and all the other different elements that you might come in contact with, pencil and charcoal and so forth and so forth. Then after that, I didn't do much with it for years, but occasionally I would sit down and do something. And then in 1977, I did a picture for each of our 4 kids for Christmas. 3 of them had buildings as the primary subject. And so that kind of encouraged me to think about doing something that I might, just might sell if I really had something interesting. So I had seen a picture on the wall at UNESCO of a little village in Italy called San Gimignano. And the picture was just the city itself, the wall that surrounded the city with the watchtowers and the church tower sticking above it. It really created an impression on me because it had no sky and no land underneath the wall. So I used that same concept on Market Street, which is now 2nd Avenue. There are 20 continuous buildings on that street. I worked on that all of 1978, didn't know what I was going to do with it. And then finally, as I took it to a framer in Madison frame shop, a guy came along who I didn't know from Adam. His name was Charles Wallace, and he said, I sell prints, and you really have something that would be ideal as a print representing the Nashville area. So after he called us 6 times and said, you really need to do this, you really need to do this, I said, okay, if you'll help us get started. We did get finally all the ducks in a row. And that was early 1979. We did our first printing on February the 6th, 1979. And this was Market Street. It was very long. It was 37.5 inches long. It's the longest print I've ever done. And at first, it didn't sell too good because it was such an odd shape, 14 inches wide and real long. But gradually, we lined up a few accounts, a few galleries that carried the print and didn't do a whole lot with it until he took it to Claire Hieronymus at the Tennessean. And she put it across the top of the newspaper in August that year. He'd sold some of the prints, but not that many. But after we got this humongous publicity on a Sunday morning across the top of the newspaper, we sold 300 prints in the next 5 weeks. So that's when I felt like, I did make the right decision to go into this. And as I say, that was a hobby at that point, and it took 10 years to really convert completely over to the new career. But that did happen in '89. And, I had no idea exactly how many pictures I have done over the years, how many watercolors, because that's basically, they're all pen and ink watercolors. But we're working on a book lately of my work. And Matt Fisher at Picture This Gallery told me, we have a record of 556 images that you've done. And I thought, wow, I didn't realize that, because people had asked me. I said, maybe a couple of hundred, maybe 250. Well, as it turned out, we've compiled all the information for the book, and we left out a few that were similar to other ones. We wound up with 461 images, 386 pages in this book that will be out before long.
Wow.
That's a synopsis of what I've done for the last 42 years, and it's something we've talked about doing for 10 years and just now getting around to do it.
It's very interesting to know that at some point you did have some formal training, because your artwork kind of captures a slice of time in our community, and the skylines and things have evolved. And did you ever think that you might serve or have become Nashville's visual historian?
Not initially. It just started out with the Market Street picture, and that was, of course, it contained a lot of history. Those buildings were built in the 1800s. And then I went on to other historic buildings, Union Station, the Hermitage, Parthenon, etc. And people started calling me a historian, and I said, I'll accept that. But it's so coupled with being an artist and having what I call a specialized technique with the pen and ink and the watercolor, and then using a lot of what I call warm watercolors to brighten the picture. And people liked it. And I wasn't really creating, as it turned out, wasn't creating art so much as I was creating memories. And I think that was what helped sell a lot of the product. Now, granted, most of it is subjects that I've done right here in Middle Tennessee, in particular Nashville. I would say 90% of the prints that we do stay within 50 miles of this spot right now. The rest of it goes somewhere around the world. People come in occasionally and say, oh, I'm going to send this to Uncle Joe in Australia or Aunt Susie in Germany. We have shared some of the wonderful aspects of Nashville with the world through my artwork. And that makes me feel especially good and especially blessed that I'm able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Nashville is such a melting pot for creatives, and it's interesting how your creativity has evolved over time. I'm wondering, I know some other creatives who have other hobbies like playing an instrument or clog dancing or things like that. Is there anything else in your wheelhouse that we need to know about?
You won't find me clog dancing, that is for sure. I do. I have a special little garden, and actually, when we lived in the previous home we had in Hermitage, I had a big garden. When our 4 kids were growing up, I had maybe 45 different kinds of vegetables in that garden during the summer. And it still lingers on with me. I was in Future Farmers when I was in high school, so that kind of gave me a little bit of appreciation for the dirt. I still have this little garden in the back of where we live now, and it's not real big, but this year it's been a joy for me to go out there every day to look and see what's blooming and see the hummingbirds come in to attack the flowers. And it's just been a great second joy for me on a daily basis.
What actually led you also to be a Metro Council member?
Actually, I have this personal code that the service to humanity is the best work of life. And so my way of service was to be in community organizations that help other people. And that's really what led me to be in the city council. I was active not only in organizations like Chamber of Commerce, which is more business related, but the Exchange Club, been very active in that. If you're not familiar with it, it's a community organization just like Lions or Rotary, those kind of organizations. And we do like 90-some projects a year in our little club.
Wow.
We've got about 45 members. It's very, very active. And we sponsor 1,000 flag display at the Hermitage during Veterans Week in November every year. The monies from that goes back to the community, and I'm very, very happy about that. So just a lot of different things. The Heart Association, the cancer, just on and on. I wound up being on the board for Summit Medical Center. In fact, I wound up being chairman. I'm the only non-physician who has ever served as chairman of that board. So there's a lot of just reasons I had connections with the community. Well, along comes Randy Kennedy, who was the councilman prior to 1995. He wanted to be a judge, but he came to me and he says, hey, you're very active in the community. He became my mentor, and he said, you need to run for the council. And so I asked around, the family first, and they were a little hesitant about it, but other neighbors and friends said, yeah, I think you ought to do that. So anyway, we ran. We had competition the first time, but got a nice majority of the votes. And after 4 years of experience, and it was, what an experience. You just don't know what you're getting into. But fortunately, with the fact that I was doing artwork, which is something that's variable every day, I was able to do the work for the council. And some weeks it really was a 40-hour per week project because there's a lot that goes on. And at that time, there was so much building and proposed building going on in my district, the 12th district, that we increased from the day I was elected to the 8 years later when I left, from 16,000 to 23,000 people that I represented. So it was really, really a wonderful experience, but at times very, very challenging when you had neighbor against neighbor on certain projects.
That's another opportunity, though, I think, to discuss not only how you manage expectations and manage conflicting opinions, but I'm also interested in maybe your definition of civic leadership and what our responsibility you think is to engage or guide elected officials today.
My approach to this is that the community's good to me, so I should pay back the community through my talents and sometimes through money. So it's a return to the area that you live in, using your blessings to help other people out and to, in the long run, improve the community itself. And this is, I think all elected officials should have somewhat that same attitude and not consider their egos as the prime reason they're running. So anyway, it's service. That's again going back to my service to humanity slogan that I adopted actually from when I was in JC's a long time ago. Of course, that's an organization you get kicked out when you're 36 years old in that organization. But it's for young people a fabulous, fabulous club to belong to.
Thank you for your service, for sure, and your military service as well. You referenced Randy Kennedy. I wondered if there was anyone else, or in addition to Randy, who has influenced your career as a community leader, someone else who served as a mentor.
Well, I'll have to point out somebody who was a very dear friend who I traveled a lot with during my first term as council, and that was Councilman Vic Varallo. Vic was quite a character, I must admit, and everybody that knows Vic knows what I'm talking about. But we did go everywhere. We went to, he was always calling me and said, let's go to the swearing-in ceremony of the new police class, those kind of things. So he was always encouraging me to do a little bit more to get around because he was just that way. He loved people, for one thing, and people loved him. He was just an unforgettable character. So he was very important to me. You know, there's other people that I've talked to. I've had a good relationship with the two mayors that I served under, Phil Bredesen. I thought I had a good relationship with him. It was always wonderful to see him work, by the way. He was inspiring, such a smart individual. So I think that also encouraged me to do just as much as I could as a councilman, because I knew that he was doing everything he could as mayor, and he was dependent on the council to help.
Mm-hmm. And that was a particularly difficult time for Nashville because of our growth at that time as well.
You know, the first month that I was a councilman, the football stadium came up. And you talk about being thrown to the wolves or being baptized in a tough way when you first start. That was quite an undertaking to understand the volume of information that was given us to consider before we approved the stadium deal. It was a baptism of fire. I want to go back to one mentor from my high school days. And I mentioned that I was active in the Future Farmers. Our teacher and our sponsor for the organization, was for agriculture class, was a wonderful gentleman named Marion Roach. And he taught us so many different values of life in the classroom, probably more than particularly the average teacher. But I learned a lot from him. We did everything from Robert's Rules of Order to planting seeds. There was just a lot of things that he taught us that were above and beyond the usual classroom that you would think of. So he was what I call an early mentor, and I certainly want to give him credit for a lot of what happened later in my life.
If we all look back in our history, there probably were one or two teachers who really helped model or made learning fun, and that's really what it's all about.
Oh, yes. Mr. Roach, and there was another teacher named Ruth who taught biology, and she was an absolute wonderful teacher. Fantastic. Oh, she had us write a paper on your purpose in life. And, you know, when you're a junior in high school, that was a tough assignment.
Boy, it'd be great to take a look at that story now and see how that paper models, did it model or mirror kind of where you are today?
Best I can remember, yeah. I didn't keep that particular paper, but yes, I feel sure it is.
Speaking of mentors, some years ago, you reached out to me. I had a health issue and someone had told you about it, and you called me because you realized I had a form of cancer that your brother had had. And of course, it really rocked my world at the time. And even today, when I think about that call reminds me of not only how much you care about people, but how much we're called to advocate and to help one another. And I know now you're dealing with a little adversity in your life, and you are really not hesitant to share your battle with others, because everyone at some point in life will be dealing with health challenges. And I'm curious how you stay so positive.
I don't know. It's just my nature, I guess. This last year, of course, with the COVID going on, everybody seemed to have extra challenges. And Needless to say, I went through a spell with pneumonia in the hospital, and I had COVID for a while, and I had 12 treatments for bladder cancer, and ironically, they did not work in the long run, but they did make me eligible for a clinical trial that hopefully would lead to a product that would take care of bladder cancer. Well, I started that trial, and after about 4 months, just recently we found out that from some tests that they've made that the cancer is there, but it's not bladder cancer. So now we're in a waiting period to find out exactly what's going on. I have total faith in the doctor that we'll come up with something, and certainly I have total faith in God that something will come along and help me continue, because I still have things I want to do. I mean, you think about that, the book I mentioned earlier, we've been kind of putting that off for 10 years, and when Matt Fisher from Picture This came to me and said, we need to do it, this is the year we ought to do a book. And finally, after I thought about it, I said, okay, if you'll help me. And certainly he and Dwayne Chambers have really, really put this book together. And we've had a couple of people to look at it to put some more I's on it, just to make sure we've got all the I's dotted and the T's crossed and that kind of thing. But I wouldn't have done that book if, heaven forbid, something had happened to me last year that would have either crippled my abilities or taken my life. And I'm just very blessed that I'm still here to do that. And also, we're doing a new skyline. And by the way, that's one thing. Since I've done 11 skylines that are 14 by 30 inch in size, they represent an important change in history of downtown Nashville. Mm-hmm. So because they're from different views, and of course, about every 4 years is when I do it, so there are new buildings that have come online. So if you check back over those 11 skylines, you will be able to get a very good history of what happened to downtown Nashville. And what a change, because any of you people out there that remember when I first moved here in 59, the L&C Tower was it. Mm-hmm. And we could come out of work when I worked uptown, and you'd see the L and the C lit up. And if it was red, it was going to be hot. And if it was blue, it's going to be cold the next day. So it was a weather report for us, too. But you could see it from everywhere because it was above everything.
I'm curious to know how many people know about the red and blue.
Oh, yeah, and most of the people that worked uptown knew about it, because if you came out at night on your way to your car, then you could see that. And by the way, if the lights, they went up, then it meant that the temperature was going up. If they went down, it was going to get colder. So it was 2 or 3 different ways that it told the weather for the next day.
It was an early engineering marvel before we had the Batman building, which also served its own place in history, I think, for Nashville.
Yes. Oh, by the way, I did a picture of the Batman building before it was introduced, and the architect came out in a Batman outfit.
No.
So there was a definite relationship from the very beginning with why it's called Batman Building.
Your mother lived to be 112 and was among some of the oldest living individuals in the United States. I'm curious to know what you think contributed to her longevity, and just want to know a little bit about her.
Sure. She was born on September the 3rd of 1898. So she lived until December the 31st of 2010, which meant she was 112 and 4 months. She lived in a lot of history-making years, if you think about it. The first car, the television, radio, all these things that she experienced. And she could tell you wonderful stories, just great stories. The time she went to graduation at West Point, and Woodrow Wilson was the commencement speaker, those kind of things. She was a suffragette. And so in the 1920 area, she promoted the idea of women voting. She voted the first time women could vote in 1920, and she voted in 22 different elections for president. She missed one in 1936. And I asked her, I said, why in the world did you miss 1936? She says, your brother was being born. And I said, poor excuse. But anyway, her attitude was so good. She's a person who loved people. She loved to talk. She took an interest in the people, not only the family, but their friends. And she just loved to catch up with what was going on. And she loved to keep up with politics. And she loved to read the paper. And she loved to read books. And in later years, when she was blind, she listened to the books on tape. And she prayed a lot, and she never turned down a little drink of wine. A little glass of wine was something that was special to her.
Well, when we're speaking about longevity, you've also been married to a very sweet woman, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about that relationship and how many years you've been together.
Well, we've known each other since we were 9 years old. This is down in Ocala. Her father had moved there. He was transferred there with Winn-Dixie's Markets because he was a meat manager. She lived 4 doors down from my grandmother. So I knew her. She was kind of one of the neighborhood things. I've known her forever, but I didn't date her until I was a senior in high school. But then we started going together, and then when I went to college, we kept up. She didn't go to college, but we kept up the romance, if you want to call it that. I said, we're just not going to get married till I have some kind of concrete underneath me. And it turned out the concrete was going to school for the Navy. When I graduated, we got married the next week. She became a Navy wife immediately. She had to follow me around different places where the minesweeper went. We started out in Charleston, and we wound up living in Williamsburg, Yorktown, and Hampton Roads in the Norfolk area before coming to Nashville. By then, we had 1 child and 1 on the way, and 1 was born shortly after I started working at Genesco, and then we had 2 more daughters that were born in the old St. Thomas Hospital 4 years after that, and then 8 years after that.
So 65 years with Dot and counting.
65 years. Can you imagine? Wow. And you know what? People ask me, well, how do you do that? And I said, patience. Yeah. There were tough times. There's some tough times. You can't get away from that. Everybody has tough times, but you just have to bite your tongue or take a deep breath or, something that tells you got to get over it and go on to the next thing.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you are a model of marriage and certainly of family as well. I know you've touched on this a couple times, but how can people find your work?
The retail aspect of my work is mostly found at Picture This Gallery, which is at 3883 Lebanon Road. And they are going to be the site to introduce my book, which will be out on October the 21st, and the new Skyline. So we're going to have quite an evening of that on the 21st of October, and also all day on the 23rd, actually from 10 to 3 on the 23rd. I'll be at the gallery. So we're looking forward to that. This is exciting. We'll also be at Christmas Village, which is here at the fairgrounds, the second weekend in November. That's always a big, big show for us. Our family did it for many years, and then Matt and his crew took it over to run it. I'm there, though, so I can sign, put any special messages on prints or ornaments or wood or anything, because actually my work has appeared in several different materials that have shown up, not only paper, but wood and plaster and plastic and so forth.
It's really nice that you're using various mediums and also creating the Christmas ornaments. I've seen them before, and I think they're just another classic way to carry a tradition forward as well as your artwork.
Yeah, we're going to have several new ornaments this year. There's some that got a variety of different balloons on it. And by the way, one thing that really amazed me when we were putting this information together for the book, I didn't realize how many different subjects that I'd done, but as it turned out, we got 17 chapters in the book because there's one on skylines, there's one on historic buildings, there's one on international travel, there's one on flowers and plants, and one on birds and animals. So all these 17 different chapters. I had no idea until we really analyzed it.
Do you ever sleep?
Occasionally. Probably don't get as much sleep as I ought to, but it's doable. But this is, I think, good advice for anybody, no matter what they are, but particularly for seniors. When you get up in the morning, make up your bed. That is how you get the day going in the right direction. It's something fairly simple, but you do it and you've accomplished something, and it gets your day started in the right sort of way.
So some friends in the community and I were talking just about you and your artwork, and someone mentioned the fact that I needed to ask you about your love of peach milkshakes.
When we leave here, I'm going to go buy a peach milkshake. That's how much of it. Well, they're special peach milkshakes. They're from Chick-fil-A, very honestly, and they have them just for a certain number of months during the summer. And I feel like Dot and I are the king and queen of the peach milkshake. So we always look forward to them coming, and then always regret the day that it's the last one for the season. they're very special to us, and the people at Chick-fil-A are very special to us also.
Well, thank you for sharing that secret with us. So I want to ask you a question about advice. Is there one piece of advice that your parents or an older adult might have shared with you that at the time you thought was silly, but now it rings true as some sort of passion in your everyday life?
Oh, I would say enjoy life, do what you can to help others. So that really started at an early age. I can remember my mother particularly starting an example on that. And this goes back to when I was real young in the Depression days. And when what we used to call hobos would get off the trains and they would come and ask for something to eat. And my mother would always fix them a sandwich that they could take with them. And she was kind of like the first of the second harvest because she was always wanting to share what we had. We didn't have all that much, but we were able to come up with the bread and lettuce and tomato or chicken salad or whatever that might be that we had at home. And she was willing to share that with somebody that was down on their luck. And certainly during the Depression, there were a lot of people that needed help physically and mentally. And that was just her way of helping. And that set a good example for me.
I'm curious to know what else it is that you do that helps you squeeze the day.
Oh, wow. What a loaded question. Well, I try to get everything in. You know, when I get through the bed, then I'll read the newspaper because I want to keep up if I can. And I say if because there are certain mornings I have meetings, like Exchange Club is every Tuesday morning. So I have to put the paper reading off to later. But I like to keep up with what's going on in the world. Then occasionally, not only that, but at night if I'm watching the TV news, I'm on the bike also.
Oh.
Doing exercise. That's actually twice a day I do exercise. And either before or after reading the newspaper, I should have mentioned this, I go out and I walk just about a mile. Fortunately, there's some good sidewalk walking in the neighborhood where I live. So I can do about a mile every day, and I do it early enough so that it's comfortable walking. Then at the end of the day, when I can watch TV and do my stationary bike at the same time, that is a squeeze to get two elements together at the same time. And then, you know, I do the artwork whenever I don't have something else going. That sounds kind of funny, but since I still belong to several organizations, Chamber of Commerce's, I'm still on a board for Metro. There's just the Exchange Club projects that we do all the time, and it's good. So I do those, and then I work in the art. It might be in the morning or it might be in the evening. Sometimes at night. I don't watch that much TV. There's only a few favorite programs that I watch. So I'll do quite a few times nighttime art work. And particularly if I'm in a crunch to get something done on a schedule. It's got to be done because we've got to make prints or that kind of thing.
I can see we not only can squeeze a lot into a day, didn't know about all the exercise, and I think that's a great example for all of us. And also, I think it merits a big thank you and round of applause to Matt Fisher and team for encouraging some of the things that they've done in your career. So I want to thank you for joining us today. What an amazing life of leadership we're witnessing from interviews and stories just like yours. Now we challenge everyone listening to go squeeze the day.